Canada will ban harmful single-use plastics from coast to coast to coast.
This is clearly just a government that's clutching at straws, trying to change the channel from its scandals.
We're going to check in, of course, on the Raptors in a moment. But first, the feds say they plan to ban single-use plastics as early as 2021. It's unclear, though, what exactly will be included in the proposed ban. But Environment Minister Catherine McKenna pointed to plastic cutlery and straws as examples. The announcement comes on the heels of a diplomatic spat with the Philippines over contaminated garbage that was shipped from Canada, mislabeled as recyclables. So what items will be banned and how will it all be enforced? Sean Fraser is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. He joins me now from Ottawa. Hi, Mr. Fraser. Nice to see you again.
Hi, pleasure to be here as always.
Mr. Fraser, when will it be decided exactly which products end up getting banned? Like, when will the final list be determined?
Certainly. So right now we've got a review going on that's informed by science. It's going to identify which single-use plastic products are harmful, those that essentially can't be easily recycled, reused, and repurposed inside the Canadian economy. There's not a firm date because we don't want to undercut the results of the scientific review. But the Prime Minister shared this morning that the ban would take place as early as 2021. You mentioned during the prelude the kinds of products it might include, things like plastic cutlery, styrofoam food containers, plastic grocery bags, essentially any harmful plastic products that are designed to be disposed of after a single use.
How would establishing a timeline to enact this pledge undercut any of the science being done?
Only that we don't want to prejudge the outcome of that science. When the review is going on, we don't want to announce that there's certain products that would be banned that in fact can be dealt with in a different way. If you look at some of the opportunities that I've learned through my conversations with the chemicals and plastics industry, right now, if they had access to more plastic that could be repurposed, they could put it into products like roads that will strengthen the quality of the roads. They can improve the quality of roofs over homes to make them more weather resistant. And if we start declaring that certain products should not be included before scientists actually tell us that in fact they are harmful, we might be negating an economic opportunity that exists in our country.
With respect, though, I take your point on not wanting to establish which products. My question was focused more on the timeline under which you'll sort of decide which of these when Canadians essentially will know which products are banned. And I'm asking because the announcement was framed in a certain way today. There will be a ban of certain products to be determined as early as. It sounded very much like an intent, not necessarily a policy announcement, more like a campaign announcement than a policy one. So I'm just wondering, is there a timeline? Like, is there a certain timeline by which this list will come out?
I expect it will be in 2021. One of the reasons, there's really two purposes. One, as I mentioned, was the need to conduct a thorough scientific review, and we want to complete that review first. But we also want to engage consumers and industry to make sure that they have time to adjust their practices, so we don't pull the rug out from under anyone before they have time to prepare and adjust to a new reality that will have eventually zero plastic waste in Canada.
I'm glad you brought up industry because I wanted to ask, we heard from, for example, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business calling on your government to study the potential impact of this ban on small businesses that either produce or use single-use plastics. How will you mitigate the potential damage to those businesses?
Well, one of the things that we should point out is that to start, for many of the plastic products that we use today, there's already an affordable replacement. You see restaurants making the switch from plastic to paper-based straws, for example, without having an impact on the price of goods that they sell in their community. We've also seen economic analyses from Deloitte, for example, and I think the figure is somewhere close to $8.6 billion of lost plastics that go into our landfills each year. The fact is, if we do this the right way, we're actually going to create an opportunity to have an economic gain as a result of pulling the product that's currently going into our oceans or into our landfills that could be re-injected to help with innovation in Canadian industry.
Another report by Deloitte and ChemInfo Services stated that between 2012 and 2017, plastics manufacturing became one of the fastest growing sectors, worth about $35 billion in sales, employing 93,000 people in Quebec, Ontario, and Alberta. I'm not taking away from the validity of what you're trying to do, but what will you do to ensure that those jobs really aren't put at risk?
Well, that's a great question. That's one of the reasons that we want to take the time to get this right. We don't want to pull the rug out from under an industry that's experiencing serious growth and putting Canadians to work. That's why if we actually do this in the right way and stop having the plastics products that these companies are able to not only produce but to reuse and repurpose, if we stop depositing those in landfills and re-inject them into a circular economy in Canada, we're going to see some of these growth-leading companies in Canada create more jobs to help put these plastic products to use in a different way than they were initially designed.
So do you think that those 93,000 jobs won't be put at risk by what you've announced today? Is that what you're saying?
No, if anything, I think we've created a new opportunity for economic growth in the so-called circular economy. I don't expect that we're going to have the industry put at risk. It's the last thing that we want to do. We're taking the time to get the policy right to ensure that we're not banning plastics outright. Of course, there's plastics that serve a valid purpose in Canada that have multi-use design. And it's really the environmentally harmful products that are designed to be disposed of after a single use is something we heard from Canadians loud and clear. It's something that they want us to move on, and we're moving forward in a responsible way.
I wanted to also ask you about something that Minister McKenna said during this announcement, that essentially the government wanted to transfer the cost of recycling products from municipalities to producers or to businesses. How do you go about doing that?
Excellent question. This is something that's being done around the world with really incredible success rates. If you look at what the European Union has done, they've implemented a model where they set targets for the reduction of the single-use plastics and expect their member states to implement plans to that effect. We agreed with all of the provinces and territories as part of the zero plastic waste strategy previously that zero plastic waste is a goal that we should have. What the federal government's doing is implementing benchmarks over time with a schedule for provinces to meet. So, for example, to have a 25% reduction over 2014 levels by 2025, 30% by 2030, and 50% by 2040. And then we'll work with our provinces and provincial and territorial counterparts to help them achieve those benchmarks, so we reduce the amount of plastics that are being disposed of and not being re-injected in a new way to our communities. What happens
if you don't? Or the idea of penalties, enforcement, have you thought that through?
Penalties and enforcement as...
Well, for provinces that don't comply with whatever you've set out, but secondarily for individuals, for example, who don't comply with whatever the ban ends up being.
Sure. So right now, what the purpose is, it's not setting up some sort of new offense that's going to punish a person who uses a plastic grocery bag. What we're going to do is put the responsibility on the producer. It's a concept called extended producer liability that makes it incumbent on the folks who are putting plastics into our communities in the first place to manage the entire life cycle of what they're doing. Over time, what I expect you'll see is the environmentally friendly choice will actually become the more convenient choice. And look, I'm still somebody who goes to the grocery store, and every once in a while I'll forget my reusable bags and I'll kick myself and say, my God, I've got to use this plastic bag. But I've been to grocery stores where that's not an option. And over time it creates new habits across our communities that reduces the individual contribution because they don't have that option at the outset.
I have to ask you before I let you go, from an optics perspective, did the timing of this announcement have anything to do with the impact the reputation of this country has taken over the past month when it comes to the issue with garbage in the Philippines?
Not at all, and I actually think the issue around the waste in the Philippines was dealt with responsibly and fairly quickly, and we actually had established regulations in 2016. On the timing of this, I want Canadians to realize reducing plastics pollution is something we've literally been working on for years, whether it was the ban on microbead products that went into effect in 2018, whether it was the $100 million marine litter mitigation fund. During our G7 presidency, we made oceans plastics a priority. This has been a theme over the last couple of years, and we've capped off a strategy this morning by announcing the next steps that we're going to take to get to zero plastic waste.
You know, though, that critics will say that the message that your government has often touted around the environmental record of this country was called into question by what was happening with the Philippines. Was the timing of this a response in any way to that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And with respect to the Philippines, I note in particular that waste was shipped in 2013, 2 years before we took office. These are unconnected.
But was promised right after, to be dealt with right after this current Prime Minister was elected.
Certainly, and we implemented new regulations in 2016, but Canadians should have faith that we're doing this because it's the right thing. It's not a political opportunity that we're trying to score. We know Canadians want to remove single-use plastics from their communities, and we're listening to them and taking action.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Fraser. That's Sean Fraser, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment, joining us from Ottawa.
Thank you.
Too much plastic is ending up in our environment, in our lakes, our oceans, our rivers, or in landfills, instead of being recycled or reused. That's a huge problem.
This morning, the Minister of Environment, Catherine McKenna, announced the Liberals' intent to ban single-use plastic as early as 2021. But some municipalities have already beat the federal government to the punch. Several cities, including Victoria and Halifax, have already voted to ban plastic bags. And just this weekend, 2 small municipalities in British Columbia have banned certain items in their cities. Tofino and Ucluelet will no longer allow the sale or use of plastic bags and straws. Could they serve as an example for what a national ban on single-use plastics would look like? Josie Osborne is the mayor of Tofino, BC. She joins us now from Tofino via Skype. Hi, Mayor. Nice to see you again.
Oh, hello.
So you did not wait for the federal government to make this decision. You brought in something for your community earlier. Why did you make the decision you did and when you did?
So that's right. We brought in a single-use item regulation bylaw tackling plastic bags and plastic straws first. And we did it because our community asked us to do it. Over 75% of the businesses in Tofino had already eliminated plastic bags. 95% of the businesses had eliminated plastic straws. And our electorate, the people, the constituents, the visitors in our town, they were all ready to go with this. So we didn't wait, and we worked with the town just to the south of us, Ucluelet, so we could have a unified approach to removing these things from our waterways and our oceans.
You brought up the business aspect to this, and I was wondering, because today much of the reaction, at least from organizations that represent small businesses, is let's make sure that the potential impact of this on businesses is taken into account. What kind of consideration did you give that?
Well, it was really important for us, and more importantly even for Surfrider Pacific Rim, which is the organization we worked with to do this, to consult with businesses, find out what would be difficult, what would be easy, and then work with them to provide alternatives. So, for example, with plastic straws, what other alternatives exist that they could use, or asking themselves, did they really need to use them in the first place? So listening to the needs of small business was a really important part of it, and they were ready to go ahead when we were ready to go ahead.
How did it impact, I guess, specifically the final offering or the final decision that you made, or the way in which it rolled out?
There were a few considerations that caused us to make a few changes as we went through it. And so partly that was around alternatives. It was, how do we deal with the stockpile of plastic bags and straws that already exist? And it was also listening to the needs of people with disabilities and accessibility issues who would want to use plastic straws. And so all of this had to be part of the conversation to make sure that those different needs were being met. And instead of being just a single change that came in instantly, a way of transitioning our community. And so we've got 6 months to work with them before enforcement really kicks in next year on January 1st.
How might it impact not the sort of independent small businesses, but let's say franchises of larger corporations?
Well, that's a great question that I don't know if I can answer, because we don't have any franchises of larger corporations in Tofino and Ucluelet. We're all small, independent, owner-operated businesses, and that probably made it a little bit easier to work with them.
What about the overall possible economic impact? That's another question that the federal government was getting a lot today. Have you anticipated that? Will you study that? That is sort of something that they're looking at. Do you think there will be any sort of sizable economic impact to the decision that your community's made?
I think there are going to be shifts, but I don't think the overall impact is going to be a negative one. What this does, a ban is a small part of really changing the system. And what I'm really pleased to see in the federal announcement today is the notion of extended producer responsibility and starting to incorporate the true environmental costs of the things that we use in our daily lives into the very cost of those things, making the producers of the materials responsible. Ultimately, I think consumers will respond, the marketplace will shift and change, and we're all going to be better off for it.
You talked about a 6-month period before enforcement will begin. What will penalties look like? What will that enforcement look like?
So in small municipalities especially, most of the enforcement, it's all complaint driven, and really we don't anticipate a lot of that. Really what's happened in the West Coast is a bit of a cultural shift where we're not going to see plastic bags, we're not going to see plastic straws so much anymore, and so when you do, it really stands out, and it's that social cultural change, that shift that's really happening. There is a fine system in place, and I'm hoping that it's not something we're going to need to use.
So basically that will be complaint driven as well. So someone will have to complain in order for there to be enforcement of whatever ends up happening.
Yeah, that's right. And really at this point, it's all about peer pressure in a sense. So now businesses know what they need to do. And so they're going to point out if somebody's not playing by the rules. But the other part of this is the education piece. And so having an organization like Surfrider to be able to work with the businesses, provide them with alternatives, answer their questions, it makes for an easier environment for people to change that behavior.
Is there room for change on any of this? If you do find in 6 months that the impact is, let's say, disproportional on certain types of businesses, is there any room for maneuver later on?
Absolutely. There's always room for tweaking and for changing, and councils can change the bylaw, amend the bylaw, remove the bylaw one day if we don't need it anymore because we have a provincial or a federal system in place.
You also saw, obviously, the reason we're talking partly is because of the federal government's announcement. There's a number, they haven't decided, for example, exactly what products will be banned or the precise timeline. If you were to, hand some advice to them or a sort of wish list, what would you like to see the feds do?
Well, the first thing I'd like to see them do, and I think they clearly are already doing it, is listening to Canadians. And so Canadians are asking for these changes. But being smart and strategic about the changes that can be made, working with businesses, listening to them, but also pushing a little bit. So I know that people are resistant to change sometimes. I know that it takes a little bit longer than some of the rest of us would like to see. So there's a real kind of top-down and bottom-up approach here. So it's working with communities, working with businesses, working with people, but also bringing in the regulations at the right time. Really, again, I think the key piece to the federal announcement today is around the extended producer responsibility, getting those provinces that don't have EPR frameworks into that, and then working with other provinces like British Columbia, where we already have, I think, 22 different extended producer responsibility programs, adding more items to that. So having a Canadian-wide approach is terrific. Having every municipality in Canada develop its own different set of regulations is just confusing. So I'm really pleased to see this approach.
So will this supersede whatever your council has decided eventually when it comes into play?
Ultimately, it seems like that's what's going to happen. And, I think that's, again, what people have really been calling for. And we've been really fortunate on the West Coast here in British Columbia to have a parliamentarian that's taken this forward right into the House of Commons and talk about it over and over. And clearly the call of the people and his work has really helped us.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks for your time, Mayor Osborne. Really appreciate it. Time for the Power Panel. In Montreal, former Quebec Liberal Cabinet Minister Yolande James. Back in our Ottawa studio, former Director of Policy to Stephen Harper, Rachel Curran, now with Harper and Associates. She's alongside the CBC's John Paul Tasker. And here with me in Toronto, kind of directly behind me, is Brad Levine of Council Public Affairs. Hi, everybody. Great to see you.
Hey, Vashti.
Yolande, why don't I start with you? Lay out for us, I guess, what the Liberals hope to accomplish with this kind of announcement strategically. We know that we're going to talk about the merits of the announcement of itself, but strategically, what's the point here for that?
Well, I think it's important to talk about the merits of it, but I think strategically, what's good for the government with this announcement, at first it allows the government, when we're talking about environmental or sustainable development policy, to be able to take the discussion to other things but pipeline. Pipelines. I put to the side just a second the Conservatives. I'll get to them in a minute. And again, today's polls kind of confirmed that, notably in Quebec, that there are a lot of people in 2015 that voted for the Liberal Party that are, despite the fact that the carbon tax was announced, that are disappointed with the fact that the party, that the government went forward with buying a pipeline. I think that taking the discussion to other issues touching the environment and also forcing the Conservatives to be able to, one, position themselves on the issue, and two, say something. When I look at Andrew Scheer's response today, I wasn't at all surprised to hear him say, well, it's not good. He's kind of said the same thing about every proposal or issue, whether it be with respect to the carbon plan or carbon tax. They're very aggressive with their opposition to things. But unless he plans to give a hell of a speech on the environment, and I'll have to just revise my position on this, he's not in any way given a proposal or presentation as to what he would do. So it just leaves the impression that the environment is just something that's not at all important to the Conservative Party. So people will make their own decision, but that will obviously be part of the I think, part of the electorate's considerations come October.
I want to get Rachel to respond to that. Rachel?
Yeah, so look, I think Yolande's in luck. I think Andrew Scheer is about to announce his plan for the environment, including his plan for climate change. So stay tuned for that. On this plastics announcement, look, I think it's a great idea. So kudos to the government for that. We're clearly in pre-election mode because I think this is actual, real, tangible action on the environment. It's not a carbon tax. I think it'll be widely popular. It's a good idea. What I was disappointed in today is that there was no real substance to the announcement. So the announcement was the intent to form a group, to develop a plan, to maybe come up with a list of banned substances by 2021, or maybe later than that. So there was no real meat on the announcement. I was expecting that we would do something similar to the EU, where they actually voted on a list of substances that would be banned within a particular time frame. So once again, it looked like kind of all show and no real action, and I think that was a real missed opportunity.
It's an interesting point, Brad, because there does seem to be consensus around the idea on the whole. We know municipalities, for example, some in Canada have already acted on their own. People think it's a good idea. There wasn't, I mean, we had Sean Fraser on earlier in the show. There really is no timeline other than it could be implemented at the earliest by 2021. They're going to study what exactly will be part of that ban, but there weren't a huge amount of specifics today.
No.
Felt like a campaign announcement.
Well, and it's a pretty weak one, too. I mean, watching Justin Trudeau make announcements on the environment, it's like accidentally popping into a pub for a couple of drinks, and you accidentally find out that there's karaoke, and there's a guy up there who's reading the lyrics off the song sheet, and the lyrics are true to the original song, but the guy doesn't know the tune. And watching Justin Trudeau, when he was asked by the media today to say, well, what are you folks doing to reduce plastics? And maybe that's for for later.
No, I have that clip right now. I can play it.
That's brilliant. Well, I set it up brilliantly.
Let me play it. Thank you for that. I'll play it, and then we'll get you back in right after that. Let's take a listen.
We have recently switched to drinking water bottles out of when we have water bottles out of plastic. Away from plastic towards paper. Like drink box water bottles sort of things. There's a number of choices we can make as consumers that will do better, and every consumer needs to look at ways they can make smarter choices in their consumptions. We certainly do that on a daily basis as we've switched from plastic water bottles to paper water bottles or cardboard water bottles. But there's always more things to do, and we're looking forward to continue that.
So he had been asked, what is his own family doing to reduce plastic use there?
Yeah. So I mean that comes to credibility, and maybe it's off the question of strategy. But as we approach the election, he's going to get tough questions on the environment because he promised to do so much in 2015, and he hasn't. He's failed on so many bases. And you can see what the Minister of the Environment was doing today with this announcement saying, oh, well, the NDP announced the plastics ban back in February, but their plan would hurt jobs, and Andrew Scheer doesn't have a plan. And, this spot that they're trying to carve out is right in the middle. But the problem with right in the middle is it's not going to be good enough for the climate crisis that's upon us. You can't tackle the climate crisis that's here. And we've known this since the fall with the UN numbers coming out. It is scary. We're seeing it in our daily lives. And these half measures that are press conferences to talk about future plans that we're going to develop at committee are not going to do it. They're not going to satisfy those that want to see real action taken on the climate. And that's going to be left to, that gives a great opportunity for Jagmeet Singh and his New Deal.
Strategically, though, JP, I mean, that middle spot, there are 93,000 jobs in plastics that have to be somewhat of a consideration. You saw the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses come out right away and say, can you please study, guys, what this means for the potential on small businesses who deal in this area? I mean, is there a place for the government to strike that middle tone versus what Brad is saying?
Yeah, well, 93,000 jobs, and they did $35 billion in plastic sales last year. So it's a huge part of the economy that they'll have to account for when they do away with all this in 2 years. And the same study that looked at how many jobs there actually are in recycling, they found it was far, far less. They put the number at 500, which seems low to me, but it's going to be a huge disruption to the economy, of course, not just for the people that make plastics, but for takeout restaurants and people that use all those sort of things to package their goods. But when you look at the numbers, obviously we have to do something. Last year, as a planet, we dumped 25 million tons of plastic into the ocean, and there are some estimates, including from the World Economic Forum, which is hardly a lefty think tank. They say that by 2050 there'll be more plastic in the oceans than fish. That's shocking. More plastic than fish, and that's only 20 or 30 years down the line. So obviously as a planet we have to take action. But there are considerations. There are big considerations to make on the plastics industry side, not necessarily one that we think of when we're thinking of job creators. But I should also mention, Vashi, it's not a coincidence that this announcement is coming today, because in a week's time the Cabinet's going to have to make its final decision on the Trans Mountain Expansion project. So they're obviously trying to throw a bone to environmentalists, to the green voters out there that are concerned about our planet, saying we'll take action on the plastics front, but we might do that while also approving a massive pipeline project to the Lower Mainland.
They're also dealing with the sort of spillover effects of the reputational hit Canada took thanks to what happened with the garbage issue in the Philippines.
Absolutely.
And I'll point out before we head to a break that I did ask Sean Fraser if the timing of today's announcement had anything to do with that, and he said unequivocally no. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.